is expected to be less costly than marine gas, or LNG will be less costly than marine gas oil in the years to come. We do have low LNG prices at the moment in Europe and USA, and we have evaluated a model that the LNG price will be very competitive to the gas, to the marine diesel oil in the years to come. Although the oil is rather cheap now, this is not going to be the case in the next 10 to 15 years. Over there, you may see a graph of what has been just described regarding the emissions. And the environmental and societal benefits by using LNG as marine fuel can be summarized that again we have a reduction of SOx and CO2 emissions, we have a better air quality. Perhaps some of you that are familiar with the using of LNG in ships, you may see the smoke coming from the stack of the ship is very, very clean, and in comparison with the oil. The LNG is not toxic, is not corrosive, and drastically reduces carcinogenic pollutants. The minimization of the external costs to the society, that is minimizing the external cost of accidents, noise and air pollution, biodiversity loss and increased land use is also a great benefit of using LNG as marine fuel. The sustainable transport system by 2015 that we have evaluated within the program comes to the following results. We expect a reduction of green gas emissions by 80% by 2050 compared to the respective levels of 1990. We can expect a drastic decrease in oil dependency ratio of transport-related activities by 2050. We can eliminating the congestion increase rate. Of course, we have the need to use better fuels for vessels by 2020, and the maritime and inland terminals will also need to start providing LNG by 2025. Of course, last but by no means least, we are talking about LNG mainland stations that will need also to be developed and supply LNG in the frame of 20 to 25. Summarizing the environmental and societal benefits, the use of LNG will help stakeholders living in the EU to reach environmental targets that have been set up by international and European regulations regarding, of course, the sulfur and particulate matter. Natural gas is, at the moment, the cleanest fossil fuel, and we can deduct NOx emissions by 40 to 45%, and the particulate emissions are reduced by approximately 80%. Also, depending on the type of the engine, heavy-duty vehicles running on LNG can produce up to 20 to 25% fewer greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, last but by no means least, is a significant reduction in noise level coming from the engine operation. So, a few words about what Poseidon Med has came up to as a conclusion. As a program, we concluded that the LNG is a feasible alternative marine fuel in the region of the Mediterranean and Adriatic. We have established the regulatory framework that must be further exploited and designed in order to create a solid regulatory environment for applying LNG as marine fuel. We have investigated the technical needs on the vessels themselves and also on the ports of the region under question. In the second phase of the Poseidon Med, we have Poseidon Med 2, which is typically a totally dependent program, however, is being based on the results of our program of Poseidon Med. Poseidon Med 2 is now shaping the detailed work that is needed for creating the final results of LNG infrastructure, both on vessels and on ports. And the final results of the Poseidon Med-2, which will come in 4 years from now, in 2020, will be ready for implementation. This is the actual target, to create results that they will be implemented as soon as practical. Among the Poseidon Med-2, there are some very innovative concepts that they will be studied in detail. And allow me to refer to one of them, and this is coming from the Port of Venice. The Port of Venice has included a very innovative project that is a semi-submersible barge that transports LNG tanks within the lagoon area of Venice, thus eliminating the need for larger vessels to sail within this very sensitive area of Venice. The innovation behind this idea is that this barge will be able to transfer LNG tanks whenever it is needed to the spot point of the need, and it will be a very environmental friendly vessel, specially designed for operating within the lagoon area of Venice. We expect with great anticipation the results of this program and of Poseidon Med-2 in total. And last but not least, I must tell you that the Poseidon Med is a program co-founded again by the EU Commission. The total budget is more than 50 million euros, 50% of which is co-founded, and the program will end in December 2020. So we have 4 years ahead of us, 4.5 years ahead of us, in order to design in detail the small-scale LNG in the Eastern Mediterranean and Adriatic. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions to Ioannis about, yeah?
Yes, my name is Per Stefensson. I'm from Stena. I'll speak to you a little later about the methanol project. I just had a question. You said there that the target is to reduce CO2 by 2050 with 80%. And then you showed that the LNG is, we could maybe reduce it with 25%. So my question is, what will come next after the LNG? And how long will we have the LNG before we have to go for new targets?
Okay, thank you very much. In order to clarify the picture for you, the LNG by default produces 20 to 25% of CO2 less than oil. The figure that I mentioned in 2050 is a sum-up figure compared to what has been emitted in 1990 in a global, let's say, picture. So this is, let's say, an accumulated emission report. Regarding the availability of LNG, the picture is somehow positive, meaning that the global reservoir of LNG is far, far better than oil at the moment. And we also expect new players to come on scene, like Cyprus and Israel. And do not forget the key role that Australia and the US and Canada will play in the next years as LNG suppliers. The outcome that we had as a program discussing all these issues with various LNG suppliers or players, let's say, was that the Middle East region will step down in the next years and new players like I said, Australia and the US will come ahead. We expect that the global reservoir of LNG will be adequate to establish the figures for 2050 that I mentioned. Of course, this is a fossil fuel. This means that eventually it will come to an end. And okay, we will have many discussions ahead of us to see what's next as a fuel.
Well, it wasn't really the availability I was asking for. I was asking for how are you going to reach the 80% goal if you are putting all your eggs into the LNG?
Now, the 80% of the lower emissions is being calculated on how many ships will operate by 2050.
No, it's the goal. It is the transport goal that we should reduce CO2 emissions with 80% until 2050. Am I right?
Well, that was about. I think Per is making reference to the white paper on the transport policy. One of the reasons why we were developing the Trans-European networks was to try generally, there is no standard, it was a general objective, was to reduce the contribution of transport by 80% in 2050, 2050. Okay, so you do not need to answer to that. You can say, give me money and I'll think about it. This was an objective of the Commission, so as you're not an officer of the Commission, as far as I know, so probably you don't know that.
Over there, these.
But I'll give you, I'll take that answer.
Being responsible on what is happening on the ship, I would like to know from the gentleman who just spoke, what is the risk of using LNG? Did you have a look at that? And the second question is, in building a ship and you equip it with LNG, is that the same price as when you put the normal engines in, or is it more expensive?
Okay, in the first part of your question, LNG is safe to be used, provided that we are following the safety guidelines that the LNG supplier or the system supplier is being instructed to us. There is no major incident regarding an LNG fueled vessel at the moment. Of course, we do not have a lot of ships operating on LNG, but even so, with this small number of ships, we do not have a major impact. There was an accident, an LNG accident in Gibraltar, I think 2 years ago, which was very well accommodated, and even if a cruise ship was berthed next to the ship with the accident, nothing has happened, and there was even a need to evacuate the cruise ship, which was, let's say, in 50 meters away. So, as a conclusion, the LNG, as any other fuel, presents hazards, that is for sure. Our job is to create the guidelines and to train the people to operate the LNG on a safe manner. Regarding the cost of the vessel, this is for sure a straightforward answer. An LNG fueled vessel is more expensive to be built and rather than a normal diesel oil engine ship. Our calculations stated that we are talking about a 25 to 30% more cost on a new build if we want to have it and to use an LNG as marine fuel. If we're talking about retrofits, then this is a tailor-made answer. I cannot give you a straightforward answer. And this has to do with the age of the ship, with the initial cost of the vessel, and how the retrofit will be designed and revolving around.
Yeah, go on.
The reason asking you the first question is the fact that I was captain on a big container ship, and we almost bumped into a LNG ship in the port of Barcelona. It was about 2 or 3 meters distance before we bumped, and we were fortunate enough to avoid the collision. But that is, in fact, my question. Did that ever happen before? And what are the consequences?
Sorry, because I mean, this is not Poseidon Med. What we can tell you is we take that into account on the third forum, that's about safety. Okay. Concerning the operational measures, you will listen to a number of operators operating already LNG vessels, and that is, it's not vessels carrying LNG, it's an LNG propelled vessel, like Viking Grace. It's operating from Stockholm to Helsinki. I mean, two countries that are known not to make any compliance to regulations in terms of environment. So it is operating, okay? And please wait for the people that are already operating the vessels. They can tell you the experience because I was in the vessel. So they are operating the vessel, okay? So shall we move to the next one?
There's a question there.
Not a question, President Mark. We all agree that LNG fuel vessels are more expensive to construct, but by using, standardization process, you can, minimize the difference, the capital difference, and you can have an LNG fuel vessels at the price of a conventional. But we need to have here a trade-off. I mean, okay, somebody has to pay this extra cost. Maybe EU will provide some good incentives, but we need to target this money to get back invested in Europe. I mean, it's not clever to issue regulations and then export the money to China or to Far East. So we need to have a mechanism to reindustrialize Europe through this attempt. So we might come to a win-win situation where we will cope with the new regulations and at the same time we make a good thing for the society, the environment, and also for the industry.
Yeah, go on.
Yes, further to those Mr. Zaharoudakis said, I would like to mention that during this period, in IMO areas, Maritime Safety Committee, the specific issues is under consideration. And I think that they are looking for creating criteria and requirements as concern the safety of transportation of the cargo to the vessels. Therefore, we think that very soon, from the side of IMO, must be clear and very sufficient criteria and requirements. And I think that these specific guidelines and requirements must be on the positive way in order to avoid any incident on these cases. Thank you.
Okay, Eva. Gain for Moss.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eva Perez. I work for Fundación Valencia Port, and we are coordinating this project, Gain for Moss. Before I start with the presentation, I'd like to thank the coordinator of the Motorways of the Seas, Mr. Simpson, and the principal advisor, Captain Anselmo, for having given us the chance to present some of the contents of this action here today. The title of my presentation is Mediterranean LNG Bunkering and Ship Retrofitting Projects. And well, first we'll have a general overview of this action, then we'll look at some of the challenges of using LNG as marine fuel for the short sea shipping fleet operating in the Mediterranean. We'll analyze the risk of doing nothing, and finally we'll conclude. Well, I'm sorry that the presentation is being cut off because the design of the slide was different. You can see here the two actions that are part of Gain for Moss. In total, we'll be receiving almost 20.5 million euros in co-funding, part of the Connecting Europe facility and part of the Motorways of the Sea program. Our goals are, first of all, to provide the ports of Koper, Venezia and La Spezia with pilot LNG stations and to build two fully operational LNG break bulking stations in the ports of Fos-Marseille and Nantes-Saint-Nazaire. By doing that, and also by retrofitting 4 pilot vessels, we'll also foster greener, safer and sustainable transport in Europe. On average, fuel consumption costs should be reduced by 30% and CO2 emissions by 20% and sulfur emissions by 80%. We are carrying out measurements of emissions before the vessels are retrofitted, and then emissions will be measured again after retrofitting. We also contribute to job creation. It is estimated that at least 200 employees will be working in the European shipyards where these vessels will be retrofitted. 35 employees will be working for sea carriers, and these crews will be first trained together with the merchant marine directions in each country, classification societies, and the ship owners. And 35 employees will be working in the pilot stations and LNG break-bulking stations in Italy, Slovenia, and France. Finally, we also aim at sharing all these results with as many companies, stakeholders as possible. So we'll be organizing 8 communication events. The first one will be tomorrow in Valencia, and there'll be 7 more, mainly once the pilots are running. And we also have a stakeholders interest group that you're all invited to join. 6 countries participate in this project: Croatia, Slovenia, Italy, France, Spain, and Portugal. 19 partners integrate the consortium, plus 20 implementing bodies of the Italian Ministry of Transport. So altogether, we represent 16 Mediterranean and Atlantic ports, and 6 carriers are involved. 6 sea carriers are involved in this project. You can have a look at the consortium here, and there are still 20 implementing bodies of the Italian Ministry of Transport. So looking at the port side, the first thing we'll be doing is carrying out basic engineering studies of pilot LNG stations in the ports that you can see listed there: Koper, Nantes, Genova, La Spezia, Livorno, Augusta, Ancona, Ravenna, and Venezia. And then the ports of Koper, La Spezia, and Venezia will also build LNG pilot stations. On the naval side, we'll carry out basic engineering projects for 8 different ships, and then 4 of them will be retrofitted. The first one that will be retrofitted is a bunkering barge operated by Boluda. Is the Espa Bunker 40. And the main challenge for this vessel is maintaining capacity to supply conventional fuels whilst integrating also LNG bunkering services and maintaining safety of operations with all these different fuels. Then the second vessel that will be retrofitted is MV Corvo, operated and owned by Mutualista Azoriana. This is a general cargo vessel with capacity for 600 TEUs, and it operates connecting the Azores Islands with Lisboa and Leixões. The main challenge in this case is maintaining the ship's autonomy, and because it's operating between Leixões and the mainland, between Azores and the mainland, and here we're exploring several LNG storage alternatives, including ISO tanks on board. The third vessel is a tugboat, a port tugboat, and it'll be either Prometeo or Achilles. It still has to be decided. This belongs to the Port Authority of Leixões, and the main challenge in this case is finding space for the LNG tanks, given the reduced space on board, whilst maintaining safe ventilation distances. Finally, the last prototype will be most likely a new building by Caronte. This ship will be operating the Messina Strait, connecting Sicily to southern Italy. And the challenge in this case is the lack of LNG bunkering services in southern Italy and Sicily. We have one activity concerning building 2 LNG break-bulking stations in the ports of Nantes-Saint-Nazaire and Fos-Marseille. These 2 LNG break-bulking stations will be able to give LNG to trucks, vessels, but also to bunkering barges that may then distribute LNG to other Mediterranean countries. This activity is co-funded only at 30% because it's considered works. So we've had a look at the main contents in the action, but let's also talk about some of the challenges of using LNG as marine fuel. And these challenges could be summarized with this word: uncertainty. There is lots of uncertainty concerning many risk factors. The first and the most important one is the price of the different fuels. So the gap in price between heavy fuel oil, marine gas oil, and LNG prices. Given the gap in price today, for most of the vessels operating in the Mediterranean, it doesn't make financial sense to do a retrofitting to LNG. Now, what's going to happen in the future? that's a big question. One more challenge is the logistic cost of distributing LNG. There are many regions in the Mediterranean where there is no LNG regasification plant and there are no LNG tanks. So how, if you're operating a vessel in that area, how are you going to get LNG bunkering services serving your vessel? The third one, we've already talked about it this morning, is the investments required for LNG engines and for retrofitting or for a new building once the industry reaches an industrial manufacturing stage. So on average now it's 25% more expensive, but in 5 years' time, maybe if we reach economies of scale, will it be a bit less than that 25%? And will there be any incentives to cover that extra money that is needed? Something else that we've talked about this morning, international and new regulation and uncertainty about the deadline by which this regulation will be adopted. And finally, the lack of sufficient bunkering stations for all routes. And this impacts particularly outermost regions like the Azores, Madeira, Canary Islands, and other peripheral regions in Europe. Given the current price gap between the different fuels, and we've done this analysis for almost every ship that is deployed in short sea shipping routes in the Mediterranean, given the current difference in price, retrofitting to LNG doesn't make sense for most of the fleet. At the moment, it only makes sense for those vessels that consume a lot of fuel, so basically high-speed crafts and other kinds of ferries. But we cannot forget about the risk of doing nothing. We've also calculated what would happen if in 2020 most of our vessels start using MGO instead of heavy fuel oil. And if they start using MGO, they'll be paying much more for their bunkers, and most likely they'll have to increase freight rates. If they increase freight rates, the risk is modal backshift. We've estimated that only in this area that you can see represented here, so Ro-Ro and Ro-Pax services connecting Italy to Greece and Turkey, 75,000 lorries could be moving back from using maritime services to purely circulating using roads. And this would mean 1.1 million tons of CO2 emissions, additional CO2 emissions every year. So if that's not what we want to see, well, we'll have to basically make it worth it for ship owners to do something and not just to switch to MGO. So concluding, and these are just preliminary conclusions because the project has been running for only 1 year, what we've seen is that each vessel is a different case, and ship owners need to analyze every single vessel in their fleet in order to know what would be the best alternative for them. And just carrying out all these basic engineering studies already has a cost. So once again, the support that we are receiving from the Connecting Europe Facility program is very welcome. There is a lack of LNG bunkering services at ports. And one of the consequences is that for the pioneers that are investing in LNG dual fuel vessels, these vessels are optimized to use LNG. So if in 2020 there is no LNG where they'll be operating, they'll consume probably 20% more of conventional fuels because they haven't been optimized for conventional fuels. So we may end up seeing extra consumption just because there is no LNG available for these pioneers that have invested in this kind of vessels. Supplying LNG to ultra-peripheral regions, it's an additional complication. So this is the case again of Azores and the Canary Islands because there is no regasification plant in this archipelago. And in the case of Madeira, they have already a very well-organized LNG distribution system with Grupo Sousa, that is also a partner of the project. So we hope that more islands will learn from this experience and maybe be able to adapt a similar solution. Finally, programs and financial support reduce uncertainty, particularly technical and operational uncertainty, so they are very welcome, particularly for first movers. So what we've seen is that the downside is that there are many risk factors and uncertainty prevails, particularly concerning the price of fuels. But on the upside, we are receiving help from the Connecting Europe Facility program, and this means that projects like Gain for Most, Gain for Ship Innovation, where the first high-speed craft in the world is going to be retrofitted. It's owned by Fred Olsen and it's operating in the Canary Islands. Gain for Core and Poseidon have seen the light. All these programs help to reduce risk, particularly technical and operational risk, and we hope that this will mean more future investments. So thank you very much for your attention.
Are there any questions?
Godfrey Smith, European Shippers Council again. Thank you for your interesting presentations. You see that there is a lot of potential gain in using LNG, but how do we also mobilize the market? Because I think that for a lot of consumers, but also for a lot of traders, it's important to have the overall figures for the whole supply chain. How do we connect our reports, like on LNG shipping, to the, for instance, the choice for a port? Because if you come from the Far East, Valencia and Koper are nearer than Rotterdam. If you have to deliver your goods to Vienna, perhaps for the whole supply chain, the gains are even bigger than only for the maritime leg. So how can we combine this data and convince, in fact, the market? That would be my question.
I'm not sure if I understood well your question, so can I ask you to please elaborate a bit more? I'm not sure if you're talking about demand in a higher area and having demand for LNG from other sectors, or if you're referring to something entirely different.
I'm referring to the fact that, in fact, the decision on which mode of transport you are using, the choice for a port and so on, is in fact on the market. That can also be, for instance, on the consumer market, because they tend to get more and more sensitive for the environmental situation. So also for instance, the use of a Med port instead of one of the northwestern European ports. But if you would like to know, for instance, the environmental prestation from goods coming from the Far East to Vienna, they can be different if you go to the port of Rotterdam, then you go to the port of Koper, or you use an LNG ship, or you use a more classical ship. And how do we combine all this data so that the consumer, or perhaps also the importer of the goods in Vienna, can make his decision and also communicates this data to the final consumer? That would be my question.
Okay, so concerning the choice of consumers, what we can see is that in some areas where the regions have made an effort to basically introduce very environmentally friendly policies, and most of the citizens are very environmentally aware, some of them are starting to ask for also very environmentally friendly transport. And even in our area, we also see it. That's the case of Azores, or that's the case of the Canary Islands, where their regional governments are making strong investments in being seen as very green islands. And these may be very beneficial, for instance, for ship owners in those islands that start introducing greener choices. So, for instance, for Fred Olsen, for Mutualistas Oreana, for Grupo Sousa, the pioneers in these areas that are starting to think about LNG and other solutions to make transport greener. Now, I think we would need some kind of environmental labels in the products we consume, because otherwise we are not going to be informed about this kind of impact of transport on the products that we consume. And I'm not an expert on environmental labels. And finally, on the potential choice of a port in the Mediterranean against a port in Northern Europe, my personal opinion is that the economies of scale in Northern European ports are so large that it's very difficult for Mediterranean ports to fight against those, just because the vessels that will be using our Mediterranean ports will be using LNG. So I'm not expecting any kind of impact on the market share of products coming from China choosing Rotterdam versus Koper or Valencia.
Klaus?
Yes, thank you, Klaus Berggren from Stena again, and not only addressing your very good presentation, but also perhaps the others before. As ship owners, we are of course looking very closely at LNG as a fuel, and sometimes it feels like we're doing all this development of the equipment and the ports are being prepared, but where are the ship owners? And at least from Stena's perspective, when we looked at this very closely, we found that LNG is the most expensive fuel on the market. So that makes it not very attractive, basically. But maybe that will change in the future, I don't know. But an increased worry is actually the CO2 or the greenhouse gas effect. Because we can't get away from that LNG is a fossil fuel. When it's burned on the ship, it reduces CO2 emissions clearly with 20-25%, whatever. But there are now coming studies on the market saying that if you look from well to wheel, there's another story, and LNG is more or less similar to marine gas oil. Now that makes us as ship owners a little bit worried, because we know in the future there will be demands on us to reduce greenhouse gases. And then we are a bit worried to invest in infrastructure for another fossil fuel, instead of looking at something else. That's basically just to come back on what you said before. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? I know it's getting near lunchtime. Thanks, Eva. Now, CO2 compensation reports, which is Jose, so that'll be 45 minutes.
1 hour, 1 hour to make it a round figure. So, no, I will not actually stand. Can we have the presentation there? I will actually not take much of your time. I think 5 minutes will do it, I promise. And as I will be chairing the reopening, we will